Mike, let's talk a little bit about college life. I like to think of it from my vantage point of a campus minister as a marvelous challenge. In one way you could say, well, it's anxiety producing and it's hard and it's difficult work and so on. But I like that notion of it being a challenge to develop one's talents, to learn how to meet new situations, how to form new relationships, how to use one's brains to develop one's critical thinking. It's a marvelous opportunity, I think, to grow as a person, to develop one's character and one's skills. You've been at it a couple years of being a collegian. When I talk challenge in that way, does that ring any bells with you?
Yeah, the college years are probably I would say, the biggest challenge, because you're just on the road to becoming who you are, becoming an adult, and it's a great time of development. Although a lot of things might have been formed at earlier ages, they're developed, they're brought out, and it's a big time of change, and that change does cause anxiety, and all of that is a big challenge to become what you really want to be, both academically, for your career and all, but also the person that you want to be.
Which has a more spiritual or religious dimension to it, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah, to talk in those terms. Yeah, I think very often in life, if we can transform what appears to be difficult situations into challenges, we're better off. I think that it's a change of perspective. Instead of sitting around worrying about it, you're able to see it in a new way. So I asked you to come on this radio program here, I'm sure there's a certain anxiety to it. I've done hundreds and hundreds of them. That's one thing. You're coming on here, and I don't think you've done a lot of radio programs in the past. So, you could sit there and fret and say, this is terrible anxiety, and there is a certain amount. But to transform it into a challenge makes a different sort of event out of it, it seems to me. And one where you can say, well, it's a challenge to see if I can interact and hold my own in the conversation or make a comment that's helpful. It's a challenge to say, can I reach down and tap some of my own experience here to work with and to further this discussion. And I believe it feels different that way. I think it's a very hard mental task to achieve, by the way, when we're anxiety-ridden and we're feeling as though walls are closing in on us and we're at the bottom of the pit. It's a little hard to think challenge, but that is a good change of perspective in general. So the collegiate years as challenge make a lot of sense to me. Yeah. Thinking, Mike, about a specific kind of question here, the collegiate experience, and that is the task of forming friendships during one's years at the university. I think a lot of people will say they've met some of their best friends while they were at college, that they've maintained lifelong friendships with people they went to school with. It's a great opportunity for that, no doubt about it. On the other hand, there's a certain problem areas connected with it. So you want to say a little bit about the collegiate years and this question of forming friendships?
Well, I think that being at a big university, you do tend to make some very good friends. I don't know whether the friends that I have I'll be keeping throughout the rest of my life. A lot depends on where we move and other things like that. But the people that you become close to, you become very close to, because for the most part, you're away from home for the first time. You don't have that security, you don't have that support, and so you meet up with people, and as you become friends, you become much closer than you've ever been able to become with friends before, because before you always had your family there basically to help you and support you, and you always return to your family. When you're at school, if you're living in the dorm, you don't have that constant support of your family anymore, so you need your friends, and even just your acquaintances, to be there to help you, to strengthen you, to get through, this horrible week when you have 3 papers to write and 2 exams and it's all coming due. You have to rely on your friends for that support that in the past you probably got elsewhere.
That's probably one of the fine things about the collegiate experience, is this necessity of moving away from family, at least the kind of dependence you described on family, and moving it out into a larger world. I think that is a very valuable kind of lesson for people. that there is the need then to form these friendships, as you suggested. I think that would be an important part of the growing up process in the United States. Of course, we have, during the teenage years, a great rebellion against parents very often, although some writers and psychologists claim that that's overdone, that the teenage years are not as traumatic as some of the literature might suggest, or popular writing about it. But still, it has its own challenges, and part of it is to define oneself over against the parental generation, to create one's own life. And I think much of what goes on in the teenage years has that purpose and should be seen that way by the adults and the parental generation, that the young people need their opportunity to define their own style, their own way of going, and to gradually grow in this greater independence. And then the college years strike me as sort of intensifying that effort. The challenge is new now, and the prop isn't there, because a lot of the teenage thing is based on the fact that the parents are there, and one can be rebellious, but it's within a framework where you can always go back. We say home is where, when you go there, they have to take you in. Well, parents during teenage years are those people who you expect to somehow be responsive even when you've been rebellious. And I think there is that sense that goes on. It's a safer kind of rebellion in a way. But the collegiate experience often doesn't have that character. One is more floating and more on one's own. And perhaps then, as you suggested, friendships become intensified. I thought that was a good point, that there's an intensification of that relationship precisely based out of one's own needs for companionship and people to do things with and people to share with at a deeper level. Well, what about, I was thinking about a situation in residence halls. I was reading recently that in trying to, collegians and coming to grips with going away to school and new experiences in residence halls or in other living situations, that they should not feel as though their roommate has to be their best friend. I mean, we all know stories of people who met as roommates and they got along famously and they became lifelong friends. And they will talk about, yeah, we roomed together at school and all that. But there's a more common experience, I think, of relationships not going well when one is thrown into that abrasive, close situation. I notice when I preach homilies and say something about roommate problems, I usually get a lot of knowing glances because there's a certain amount of problem along that way. And I would think one of the things to keep in mind is that it could well be that the roommate, randomly chosen, is not the one who shares your interest or not the one who you want to end up being close friends with. What do you think about that, Mike?
Well, I think that's very true. A lot of people go into their first year of college expecting, okay, at least I have a roommate and we're going to be good friends and I'll have that. But so often you're just simply not going to be compatible with your roommate. I know personally, when I first came to the University of Toledo, my roommate and I, it's not that we didn't get along, it was just that we weren't compatible. We just didn't talk. As the year went on, we could go for weeks without actually saying anything to each other. And it wasn't that, I don't think we disliked each other or we didn't like each other. We were just indifferent to each other. And
mostly because you didn't have anything in common?
Right. What we had in common were that we both didn't smoke. And that was the only preference that was asked, really, I think, on the sheet, saying, and maybe there were a few about when do you normally sleep and all.
Oh, really? They did ask those questions, too? In order to sort out how they were going to join people in rooms?
I think they did. I'm not sure if that was at Toledo or not. I had some other schools that I had to fill it out for. But they were just very basic questions that aren't going to tell you, if you have that, your personalities are just going to click together or not.
Were you able to maintain civility in that relationship?
Basically, I mean, we both had just decided without saying anything that, you're living here and I'm living here, so we'll just
How did you share duties? I mean, how did you have to take turns cleaning up or something? Or
if the individual made a mess, then that was who cleaned it up. You were in charge of your desk and your bed. Occasionally, when we would vacuum, just whoever, that it actually kind of came out to be that whoever's parent was coming up and seeing the dorm room would actually vacuum.
That was the time to clean. That's good, Mike. I like that. So, if your parents were coming, you better get the place looking decent.
That's right.
But the point being here that you didn't develop a friendship with this roommate.
Right. It was just, and now, if I see him on campus, I might smile, but anything more than that. And this is, someone who I lived with for 9 months, and you think, or a lot of people think that if you've lived with someone for 9 months and shared that close quarters, you should pretty well know each other well and all this, but a lot of times it just doesn't happen.
Yes. And I would think that's just important for people going into the situation to remember, and for parents in guiding their young people to caution that it might well happen that it just doesn't click and that the common interests aren't there. Talking about the common interests, it's one of the keys to friendship, isn't it? That one likes to do things together and has a certain shared value system. And that one is, I think, eventually that one has a similar world view or religious outlook on life. I think that helps in forming the friendships. But before, I want to come back to that, Mike, but I want to talk a little bit about the other kind of experience. And I think that there's some people who just don't make friends easily. They're shy, they don't have social skills, they don't know how to reach out, and therefore they're often feeling isolated, estranged from the community as a whole, and I think it makes it hard to stay in school. I mean, I know some students who, just because they couldn't make friends, they remember from high school years back home it was different. I had friends there, my friends are still there, I can go back and talk to them, I feel comfortable, I'm myself around them, etc. And here at school, it just hasn't happened for me. And I think that's a very sad thing, but I think all of our efforts to retain students in school, and there is a lot of effort along that line these days, retention programs, very important, that once people are on campus that they don't leave precipitously without thought, and that there's positive experiences that will keep them there. I think that one of the things that goes badly is lack of friends, and that's a very painful experience.
Oh, I think definitely that's really, when you're first coming to school, especially if you're going away to school, you're moving to a different city and are going to be some distance away, if you don't make friends, or at least even just acquaintances that you can talk to and say, look, I'm having this problem or whatever, it's going to be very stressful because you have to then bear all the weight of being away from home, doing your own laundry, all of the just things that you really haven't had to deal with, and you have to handle all that by yourself. Whereas if you have at least a few close people who say, well, I'm going through the same thing too, it's not all that bad, maybe we can get together and study or whatever, that really helps to ease the burden, just knowing that there are other people out there. If you don't realize that, everyone's going through the same thing, it becomes very, very difficult, and all of that pressure weighs on you, and you're just saying...
That's why I think it's important at times to articulate that problem of shyness, and that not everyone is an extrovert, and not everyone is gregarious and makes friends easily. I think to articulate the problem is to alert the other the people who are more of shy nature to that they're not unusual, they're not weird or something. There's a certain percentage of the population who simply has trouble doing that. And to articulate the problem, like for me to say it in a homily, or to discuss it in a bull session or something, seems very helpful, precisely for the reason you just said, that then you don't feel weird or alone, like you're the only one. But you can sense, well, other people have the same problem, and there are ways of coping with it. I'm not just a victim of this personality trait of mine. It is possible to learn to overcome it, move beyond it, form friendships, even though it on the surface of things is more difficult to do. So I think we're looking here at the problem of not having friends. I was thinking just as simple a thing as having someone to eat with. I would think it's very hard for a collegian to go to the cafeteria and not have anybody to eat with. Just walk in and go through the line and sit down by oneself. Now, maybe some people handle that easily, but I would think that there's a lot of people who would feel somewhat embarrassed that they were alone, or self-conscious that they weren't in a group, or would just feel the sort of pain of not having anyone to share with at that time.
That's very true. I mean, I was fortunate because I had a friend who had gone to my high school and I'd known since like 4th grade. And she and I, when we came up together, we always ate together, and we always had that common bond of becoming from the same small town, that, I had someone to eat with and do things like that with, that generally you do at least in twos, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who you don't see a lot of people in the cafeteria eating by themselves. So if you want to go to the cafeteria and eat by yourself, you feel self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
Basically what happens for people like that, I've noticed, that they would just go to their room and eat,
Mm-hmm.
because at least there no
Get
one was
some fast
looking
food,
at you.
Get some fast food.
Fast
someplace.
food, or you could go to the cafeteria and pick things up and then
Uh-huh.
go back to your room.
Take it home, or back to your residence hall. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You were able to. You had a friend like that, and I guess you relied on her to a degree, didn't you? I mean,
I did. We both helped to get each
Yeah.
other through the first quarter, at least,
Uh-huh.
of meeting people and becoming friends with actually, we sort of formed our own group that we
Mhm.
stayed friends, and we invited other people in our group, which is easier if you start out as two and trying to start a group of friends
right.
than one in starting a
Mhm.
group.
Did you find new friends that way then? Are there other people that you met through your couple of years of college who are friends that you didn't know from back home?
Yes, I did, and a lot of the people that I met either I met and then invited, to eat with us or whatever, and then gradually we became closer till I had a core group of about 4 people my freshman year that we did a lot together. We were a small group, all of us somewhat introverted and liking, not big groups, not
Mhm.
large numbers of people. So we added people who we hadn't known, which, was very nice to then say, well, okay, I know people other than just from my high
you
school.
had a little expanded group. Are you suggesting to me that one of the common denominators in that was a certain more introverted as opposed to extroverted style and personality trait?
Well, in our group it was. All the members of our little core group
Mm-hmm.
were introverts, and you could see that, they weren't the people who were going to go out and go to the big parties or the big social events,
Mm-hmm.
just because things like that weren't enjoyed by having to, be outgoing and meeting all people, whereas smaller things, smaller groups, smaller discussions, whatever,
Mhm.
were much more enjoyed, and that's what really I tend to do more with my social life.
Uh-huh. That's interesting. What about the other bonds I was talking about, the bonding of liking similar things? I mean, when I think in my life, a lot of my friends have been people that, guys who I enjoy doing sports with, that I played golf with or played sports with in the past, and that seemed to be sort of the common bond, so that part of the friendship was developed around the notion that we did things together. And I wonder how much of that dictates the friendship patterns on the campus. That there's a particular group of people that they all like to read poetry, or they're all in the band, or they're all or involved in student government, or things, or they like to go to movies, or they like a certain kind of music. Maybe music is a common bonding for some. What bonding do you see like that, Mike?
I think that most small groups or whatever, well, small or large groups like that, do form around at least one thing that's held in common.
Mm-hmm.
For us, we had all been in a group on campus, and then we all also kind of fell away from the group. And the fact that we'd been together and been in this activity, and then kind of decided that it wasn't really for any of us, we always had that in common. And I think for other people, too, you're going to have something, like you said, you play in the band, or you are in some group on campus where you have that common interest. Or not necessarily a campus group. I don't want to say that all little groups of friends are derived from the campus, because there are things like music, or if you're into drama or things like that, that can tie people together. But I think basically, especially on the college level, you have to have one thread that ties the people together. It could even be just something academic, that you're all in the same class together.
I think at the university, a lot of times, like pharmacy students seem to be, together often. They seem to have some bonding. I don't know if that's just, I happen to run into people like that, but they have a tough, rigorous program, and they seem to share a lot of those burdens and so on. And I presume that happens in other departments also. I'm thinking, Mike, about the religious dimension of all of this, and and what role that campus religious groups play. I think if you look at the large numbers of religious groups at the university, it's quite amazing, and I think many people do find their primary friendships within those groupings. There's many Bible studies and evangelical groups, and also in our own setting, we have our Corpus Christi Parish, the University Parish, and our Newman Club, which attracts people of like interests. I see a lot of bonding happening that way, and I see it as another example of friendship. In other words, friendship occurs a lot of ways. One is that there's something useful about the relationship. In a sense, I don't want to put it in just those terms, but the young lady that you knew your first year, there was a usefulness to it. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but that it was mutually helpful, that you weren't alone in this large university setting. The other thing is that there's these common bondings about interest, all of us like music, or all of us are in this department. But then there's some sort of deeper level that functions, I think, that I might call value system or meaning system or religious kind of conviction. And I would like to think, like, for example, our Newman Club, that there would be friendships formed on the basis of shared values or belief in Christ. I'm not sure that's articulated that way, but there's a sort of common sense maybe that we are in it together and hold certain ideals in common. You think that's true?
Oh, I'd have to agree. And I think when you start off with the friendship, you might have just the fact that you're both in the Newman Club or whatever group. You've got that in common, so you say, well, let's explore this and see if we've got the more underlying things. And then you'll find, if you have two people who are very much interested in social justice, so they have that sort of framework of thought that helps to tie them together. And it is something that's more under the surface. It's not just the superficial thing of, well, okay, I'm Catholic or whatever. It's the thoughts, the ethics, the values that they have that do tie people together, and that's what makes for a deeper relationship. You can have the superficial friend go out with on the weekend relationship that then evolves into the, I can tell this person, that whatever the situation in South Africa really, really bothers me. And because you hold the same common values, that's not a problem. Whereas,
yeah, if you're with somebody all the time that just has a tremendously different political view than you have, and sees the world very differently. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of friendship that happens like that, but for the most part, we seem to gravitate to kindred spirits. I mean, if you're really involved in anti-apartheid movement, and someone else has got certain prejudices and a victim of racism in some way in their own psyche, I mean, that really becomes a problem, doesn't it? I mean, it's very abrasive. I mean, the person turns you off. I must say I deal with a certain number of collegians who have that experience. They have friendships with people, and then they will begin to say, geez, so-and-so and I are growing apart. We have such different views. In fact, I sort of hate to bring up this topic with them anymore. And I think that's when you begin to see the breakup, because you don't have that fundamental value system that we hold together. I have a feeling that the long-term relationships and the friendships that endure for us do have that deeper bonding very often. I'm not saying always, because you can have acquaintances and you like to play golf with them and you never talk anything more seriously than golf, and you play golf with them forever and throughout your adult life. I mean, that certainly happens, I know that. But the ones we treasure, make a difference to us, I think, have this shared value system, and at least open up the chance of communicating, as you suggested, at a deeper level. What about back to my opening thing about challenge, Mike? Is the question of friendship got a challenging side to it? I mean, or is that a bad way to think about it? I mean, probably for the shy people, it's a challenge, like how am I going to meet people? And how am I going to get to be more at ease?
Well, I think all relationships are challenged. For the shy person to go out and start relationships. For the person who maybe isn't so shy, who's very extroverted, the challenge is to work on depth in your relationships. It's a good way to look at it, that it's a challenge for the individual, not so much on the one-to-one relationship. It's not a challenge that I have to be a friend of you in particular, but just the challenge to develop socially, to be able to handle yourself in social situations, because we'll all have to deal with them, and then to develop so that you can have that support depending on your own personality, whichever you either tend to
whichever
move
side
towards.
you're on, yeah.
Right.
I was thinking when you said that about the challenge of deepening. I like that very much, and I think in a sense that's a challenge of life, to have friends that are more than just superficial acquaintances, where there's a possibility of working together on important, significant things, or talking about matters that are important, or of sharing some deeper feelings that one has. I mean, that's part of growth and part of the challenge of life, I think, to always, I mean, even if you think of marriages, friendship's a great predictor of success in marriage, maybe the best predictor, and but it's a matter of deepening it, isn't it, of gaining greater intimacy and making the friendship flower in one way or another. Well, Mike, we've been talking here about the collegiate experience and the whole question of developing friendships, and we put it into the framework of a challenge, and it comes out in different ways. And for some people it's a sort of an exciting adventure, for others it's a little more anxiety-producing, but in all cases it's a matter of what makes us human and what brings us closer to God. I mean, to have good friends is to know something about what it means to say God cares about us, and that God is a lover towards us. It's our experiential base for knowing that the mystery is gracious. And it brings us some of our deepest joys in life. And I do think that the collegiate years present marvelous opportunities to form friendships, and as you well suggested, to deepen them. And sometimes they're the ones that last and that you treasure throughout your life.